When you were running around Vegas, you had Elvis. I think Tom Jones was around there as well.
We met at the Riviera one night, and I commented on his cufflinks, and he went, "Here, you have these."
Wow.
Oh, yes. Well, Aquaman, one of my favorite superheroes.
Oh, you mean the Snoop Dogg party?
Yeah, Snoop Dogg, yeah.
There's necessarily a reality above just the material reality.
Home protection.
Bow and arrow. I don't know.
Our nation is incredibly strong, but it can easily be brought down from within.
I think we all have a calling to a higher purpose.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live event with Dr. Cy Garte. He is a PhD in biochemistry. He has been a tenured professor at New York University, Rutgers University, and the University of Pittsburgh, division director at the Center of Scientific Review of National Institutes of Health, and interim vice president for research at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. I'm super excited about Cy being here. He is currently a visiting professor of pharmacology and toxicology at Rutgers. And he's published over 200 peer-reviewed scientific papers, 3 scientific monographs, and 2 mass-market books. Cy has also given presentations on the intersection of biochemistry, evolution, and theology at many, many conferences. Cy, welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Great. And so everyone that's tuning in live and is starting to tune in across the multiple platforms, just be aware we were both experiencing some technology issues here, some delays. So I'm going to do my best to set Cy up so that he has to deal with minimal interferences from me in the time so we can hear maximally from Cy. But a crazy little story. I was watching Cy on a live cast on Cameron Bertuzzi's channel about 3 weeks ago, and I'm pretty sure it was live. I'm watching it. The stream ends, and I don't know, maybe 30 minutes later, I get the scheduling notification that Cy agreed to come on the program, and I was super excited that I just seen the man live, and we booked it the same day. So it was really, really exciting time to see that. So I appreciate that. We hopefully today we'll get a chance to speak a little bit about Cy's background, talk a little bit about his communistic upbringing, talk a little bit about his theory of science, his theory of beauty, his writing processes, and everything in between. So I'm really excited about our time together with Cy, and I think we're scheduled to be here for 2 hours, and we'll cover your questions as we can. Angelina's in the background producing, and so we're super excited to have you, super excited for you to join as we dive in. The first topic I want to get to with Cy, and again, I'm gonna try to overcome any kind of delays that are coming on my side, is that I read in his book, his most recent book is this one, that talk about the harmony between science and faith. And he has this great line in there that says, science is telling us there must be something more behind this fractal nature. Science is telling us there must be something more behind this fractal nature. And so I'd like to set you up, Cy, and just give us a briefing about your general thesis of the book and what it means to have something behind the natural sciences that is fractaling in nature.
Sure. Well, first, just let me say thanks, Rick, for having me on. This is a great privilege and an honor, and I hope I can do it justice. Yeah, the book is called Science and Faith in Harmony, and my point of using the word harmony is, well, 2 things. First, I was at one point interested in becoming a musician. I never had quite enough talent to do that, but I love music, and I went to a music high school. And I learned about harmony, and everybody knows this about harmony. If you hear, for example, a soloist singing a beautiful melody, perhaps at church, it's beautiful. But then the choir comes in, and they're not singing the same note as the soloist. They're singing different notes, but the result is what we call harmony. And that adds a huge dimension to the beauty of the music. So the reason I use that is, to me, it's an metaphor for the relationship between science and Christian faith. They're not singing the same notes. They're not saying the same things exactly. But what science tells us about our world, about creation, and what we learn from the Bible and what we believe as part of our Christian faith are not exactly the same thing, but they harmonize beautifully, and they certainly don't contradict each other. And that is what the book is about. And I basically divided into a large number of very short chapters. There are 44 chapters, but most of them are 3 pages long. And each one of them covers one aspect of reality, let's say, seen from both a scientific and a theological view. And I show that while they're not identical, they're in harmony and they complement each other. So the purpose of this book, which is pretty much the purpose of my life for the last decade or more, is to combat the very dangerous and what I would call insidious myth that science and Christian faith are in conflict and you have to choose one or the other. You can't hold to both. And that's simply a lie. I often say it's a satanic lie because it's very deep and it's very nefarious. And we have to fight against that. And many scientists are doing that. I'm not alone. There's a whole community of Christians who are chemists, biochemists, physicists, geologists, who are trying to show that idea, which is very prevalent in our culture, is simply wrong. Now, in terms of your question about fractals, should I go on or do you want to jump back? Okay. In terms of fractals, fractals are an interesting phenomenon that I learned about, maybe 30 years ago while I was studying other things. And they're very interesting because if you think of a cloud or the structure of lungs or many, many other things that are very complex in the natural world, you realize they don't have very simple dimensions. They're not like exactly two-dimensional squares, circles, and they're not three-dimensional either. They're sort of in between. And this was discovered by a mathematician in the 50s, and he called them fractals because they have these fractional dimensions. They're very strange, but they're everywhere in the natural world. You can't, one of the first examples was describing the coastline of, say, the United Kingdom or the state of Maine. If you try to do that, you can't, because the closer you get down to the reality, the larger the number is. You have to make an assumption that we're only going to look at it, say, from a 100-foot view, not a 10,000-foot view or a single inch view, because then you see lots and lots of perturbations in the structure. And that turns out to be true for so much of reality that I began, and this is, I learned about this just as I was beginning to think about the possibility that God might be real. And we'll get into that later, of course. But when I looked at that, I said to myself, our mathematics, and that implies also our science, is a very good approximation for the reality of the world. Okay, we have these laws that are based on math. We have constants, which we don't know where they came from. We can measure things, but we don't always measure them correctly or exactly. And it's shown up by this fractal nature of almost everything. The high level of complexity is everywhere in the natural world. And that started me thinking, why is that? How is that? Why should it be that way? And my answer was, I have no idea. And I don't think anyone has any idea. And, I had been trained as a scientist and as a naturalist and reductionist and materialist, all the things that goes with atheism. I had been trained to believe that we can understand everything about the world if we just do the right experiments and come up with the right theories. But fractals was one of those things that told me, no, we can't. It's something beyond. There's something else. There's something missing. There's something beyond what we can do with our science. And I had no idea what that was. I just knew there was something else.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And so if we live in a universe of fractals, and it certainly seems evident to me, whether you look at the sand of the seashore, you look at the nature of the branching in trees, you look at a variety of other solutions, even in stories and tales and myths, you see this fractaling nature throughout. You see it everywhere, and it corresponds back to, in my opinion, it gets back to that harmonic device that you find in music. Right, you go to the Eastern musical traditions, and you'll find more separation between the notes, so that they're more evenly scented in between. But in our Western music, you have sort of these thirds, these minor thirds that break up the sort of the trinity of the chords and how that goes forth. And you seem to find, but you always get back to the octave, and the octave reminds me a little bit about the electron that you write about in your book, about the questionability of the electron, and that, if you have a middle C and you've got a high C and you got a low C below that, they are as far as possible apart, like they're the maximum distance apart, but the ear hears them as the same note. It's a paradoxical thing. It's a paradoxical thing that breaks apart reality, but it also breathes beauty into our very hearts and our very souls. And so I want to hear from you a little bit on this idea of mathematics. You allude a little bit to Wigner's sort of this unreasonability of mathematics and how that interfaces with science. And so I guess two questions. Number one, where do you see the interface between mathematics and science from a simple man like myself who is behind a desk all day? I'm looking at it and I'm seeing math judging science. Math sort of as the prototypical Platonic judging the natural sciences. But I'm sure there's better ways to look at that. And the second question for you would be, where do you see beauty behind the scenes?
Right. Wow. Okay. Well, I'm glad you're asking such easy questions, Rick. Math. Yeah. There's some great work by John Lennox, the British mathematician, believer, has some wonderful apologetics on math related to science and faith. But I have some ideas about that as well, although I am not a mathematician. I think Wigner's paper, the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the physical science, that title says it all. I mean, we know that mathematics is a wonderful human invention that, is very closely related to logic. In mathematics, unlike in science, you can prove things based on the basic axioms of the mathematical system. You can prove. You don't have much proof in science, because anything you come up with and decide is a fact, it could be a fact, but sometimes these facts, which you think make a nice theory, gets ruined by new facts, which come in and kind of make you change your ideas. So that's science. In math, that doesn't happen. Well, it might happen in very advanced forms, but in most of the math we think about, you can prove axioms, you can prove formulas, and you can prove theorems. I didn't mean axioms, I meant theorems. You can prove them. And the same is true in logic. There are rules that allow you to make, proof statements. So now the interesting thing is that mathematics, which was, of course, originally used for simple things like, commerce and geometry and things like that, it turned out after the scientific revolution began in, the Middle Ages, and maybe a little bit before that in some places, it turned out that mathematics was very good at describing the laws of nature. You could say, for example, that there's a force of gravitation, this is what Newton said, between two objects like the Earth and yourself. And that force is proportional to the weight of the two objects divided by the square root of their distance. This is a very simple mathematical formula. It involves three components, two weights, and a distance. Why should that be true? and this is the basis of Wigner's paper, is why, and it's not just that law. There are many, many laws in physics and in chemistry that can be stated with very simple mathematical equations. And you have to say, well, why isn't it, the eighth power of one mass times the third power of the other mass divided by who knows what, some strange set of lots of different things. And even then, it's not always true. Sometimes you have to add other factors. That's kind of what you would expect. Why should mathematics be so effective in describing the natural world? There is no answer unless you believe in God, unless you believe that this is a creation of God's, and the creation was made in such a way that we can understand it and we can model it and we can describe it simply. And atheists don't like that approach, obviously, because they don't think that there's a God. But if you do believe in God, Wigner's question is easily answered. It's because that's a result of creation. Remember, creation includes all the planets, all the stars, and all the laws of science. They were created as well. You also asked about beauty. And I'm not an expert on that. There's some great work that has been done. I can't think of the names of the books, but there are some very good philosophers who have written about the nature of beauty. All I can tell you is basically my own feelings about it. I haven't done any, deep research. But every day, I'm very fortunate, and I thank God for my life every day. I live in a very nice neighborhood, which is, I have a nice backyard, which I never had until recently. I have a lot of trees. There's beautiful foliage around. I hear birds all the time. And every day when the weather's nice, like this morning, for example, I was outside and I just always realize I'm being surrounded by beauty everywhere. Flowers, trees, bushes, the colors of these birds. And I just say, thank God, thank God, thank God. And okay, but I'm a scientist. So I also know why those beautiful leaves are green. And I know why the flowers have their colors. And I know how the birds function biologically. I know their biochemistry. And here's the thing. All of that is beautiful also. When you know, and this is one of the chapters in my book, I talk about the beauty of nature, going for a walk and seeing all the beauties of living plants. And that I also know how the plants work. I know how photosynthesis works. I understand the amazing processes that go on to convert sunlight into energy. And that doesn't diminish the beauty of what I'm looking at. It elevates it. It magnifies it. Because that beauty, the beauty of the natural world, the beauty of biology, the beauty of everything is another facet of God's beneficence to us.
So let me have you extrapolate a little bit on what you just said about photosynthesis, because it is a very, very intriguing process where it seems to me that somehow, some way, a chemical reaction turns into some sort of mechanical reaction within the flower. I think that may be the way that you put it in your book. And so there's a methodology there whereby a flower converts sunlight into life through a few removes, through a process. But then also, I think that you said that there was something called an ATP that's present in all of us as well, that has some similarities there. And that maybe it's the format of what a master painter signature might be across a series of canvases and a series of artwork over a lifetime of a master artist. So can you try to connect the dots there? The importance of photosynthesis coming from the light, the mechanical causations there into creating the flower, and then also ATP. What is that, and why should we care about ATP?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, in this book, I can't go into very much detail, obviously, because these short chapters, and I'm trying to make a point rather than go into much technicality. I have another book hopefully coming out in about a year where I do that. And I do talk about that in some detail. But I'm not going to say any more about that now. It's a little premature. Yeah. So the leaves are what convert sunlight into energy, basically. All of life requires energy. We know that. I mean, if there's no energy, we don't live. And most of that energy is involved in biochemical reactions that go on in every cell. They make everything that the cell needs. Everything requires energy. It turns out there is one molecule in all of life, whether we're talking about whales, us, bacteria, plants, one molecule that is the energy currency. Think of it like the dollar. Well, the dollar is not universal, but think of it like gold, okay? Gold is universal currency. And that molecule is called ATP. It's adenosine triphosphate. Now, the problem is that now once you have adenosine triphosphate, the name suggests that there are three phosphates, triphosphate. The links between those three phosphates are extremely energy rich. So if you break one of those bonds between the two of the phosphates, you release a lot of energy, chemical energy. And that chemical energy can be used to drive everything that goes on, whether it's a cell moving, whether it's a chemical reaction that produces something, whatever it is. That is the source. The ATP is the universal currency. So now we have the question, well, okay, if ATP gives energy, how do you make ATP? That's a great question, because you have to make it. Every time you break a bond, there's no more ATP. You have to make more of it so that you can use it again. And that's what photosynthesis does. Photosynthesis is incredibly complex, and in my coming book, I mentioned that I failed the exam about photosynthesis in my graduate career. There was a big exam you have to take after the second year, and I just couldn't memorize it. It was too hard, so I failed. Luckily, I passed it the second time, but it's hard. It's really hard. However, the last step is the thing that's most interesting. And in the last step, what happens is you have a lot of very tiny particles, which are actually the nuclei of hydrogen atoms, which are called protons. And they're produced during a lot of reactions that go on after the sunlight hits various pigments, and the green pigment, the chlorophyll in the leaves. That's too hard to go into, but eventually you get a lot of these particles on one side of a membrane, and there's very few on the other side. Now, thermodynamics, the physics of thermodynamics tells us, and we see this all the time, you can't have a lot of stuff on one side and nothing on the other without a force trying to even it up. Okay, so you add some syrup to one side of a glass, it'll spread throughout the glass. That's physics. So all those particles, all those little protons want to get to the other side of the membrane. I mean, they don't consciously want to get there, but physics is telling them, go there. And they can only do it one way. They have to go through a little tiny hole in the membrane. And that hole is attached to an incredible machine. It's a biochemical machine, which includes a rotor that turns, a wheel that the rotor turns, and the wheel turns another wheel, which takes two molecules, pushes them together mechanically, and that makes ATP. So the energy of the light is converted to some form of chemical energy, which goes through a long gradient, results in this osmotic pressure of the particles on one side of the membrane, which then go through more mechanical energy, puts the two things together, you get ATP, and that's the chemical energy that powers everything. And that has been around since very close. I mean, not the origin of life, but very early in the beginning of life. That incredible system.
That is fascinating. And I want to ask you here in a second about the concept. I think I heard in one of your interviews about time being broken, or at least time being shifted in some way. I think maybe it was in relation to the idea of mass and light speed. Some of the general relativistic explanations or beliefs of Einstein. Before I get there, I just want to remind everyone that I think we've got Sci's website linked below. I've got our website as well. Please sign up for the newsletter. And we're going to link to Sci's books as well on Amazon as well. So make sure you click on those. You're checking that out while you're listening. And then also, please comment. I know we're on Rumble, we're on Twitter, we're live on YouTube, we're on Facebook. So feel free, whatever platform. If you comment, I think we'll be able to see those and answer those questions for you. I want to make this as interactive as possible. And so I want to ask you about this idea that there may be some questionability as to the integrity of time. It seems that just from my very kind of armchair quarterback type of perspective, it seems that Einstein's realizations seem to poke holes in time. And there's this idea that I have anyway, that if it's possible for time to be bent, it's possible for time to be broken in the end. And I've never really seen anything that's not made to bend, be bent and not break eventually. It eventually breaks. And so it seems like time to me is maybe a weaker link in our causal change, not only from a natural science perspective and a physics perspective, but also for our lives as well. It's something that's sort of trying to keep us down, draw us towards death, draw us towards ineffectiveness in our lives. But it seems like there's a grander battle happening, maybe even on the cosmic scale, certainly on the supernatural scale, against time. There's this great battle that's happening there. So I'd like for you to maybe explain to us a little bit about your perspective on where we are, specifically from a scientific standpoint, with time. How is time impacted by the natural sciences? And then also sort of your perspective on what time is.
Yeah, well, of course, I'm not a physicist, so everyone has to take this with a big grain of salt. But the little that I do know about time is that it all has to do with light again. I mean, it's fascinating to me that, the Bible says, God said, let there be light. And light is so important. Light is the energy source for all of life. Light is a huge mystery. It was a huge mystery for most of our scientific historical timing. And nobody understood how light could work because it seems to have a constant speed, no matter where you're going, whether you're going toward it or away from it. That doesn't make any sense. So at the end of the 19th century, people just had no idea what light was. And it was Einstein in the special theory of relativity who came up with, who came up with the idea of how light works. And he found that there is a relativity to light. And the way it works is a little bit crazy, because the speed of light is constant, but time is not. And that doesn't sound right to us. Time can slow down. If you're going close to the speed of light, time slows down. And this has actually been seen. Once we entered the space age, people were going fast enough, not anywhere near the speed of light, but fast enough so they could see that a clock that went on a spaceship, when they got back, was a few seconds slower than the clocks that had not gone on the spaceship. So going very fast slows down time.
And so is there a theory around that? Because you begin to see, you mentioned the importance of light, the importance of sun, and we go back way before Christianity as well. We go back into the Egyptian cultures where there are a plethora of sun deities. You've got Re, you've got Atum,
Right.
You've got a number of them that happened back there. It seems to me that they were onto something. Like they understand. I mean, just like you spoke about as well, the sun hits the leaves, and the leaves are what feed the cattle that then we eat. I mean, it's the sunlight being ingested and processed by the leaves that give us all life, biologically, it seems. And so, I mean, I guess what is your theory? And, I'm not talking about from a philosophical standpoint, but just like, what do you think about these sorts of, as you as a Christian, what do you think about these sorts of ideas that there was sort of these people that had these unreliable, or excuse me, unreasonable assents to what they thought was true, and it turns out, like, scientifically and maybe even theologically in some senses, that they were right 20,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't surprise me. I think God, God made himself manifest to the ancient Israelites. He made himself manifest to the whole world in the person of Jesus Christ. But we don't know if he did or didn't make himself manifest, or continues to make himself manifest to everybody in different ways. We meaning, people who follow Jesus, are fortunate in that we have his words, we have his disciples and his apostles, and we have, so much sources of truth that we can rely on. Jesus said, "I am the truth." Not I speak the truth, I am the truth. And that's the fundamental reality to me. Now, that doesn't mean that God never said anything to anybody else, or never inspired them to see some forms of truth. I think that's probably right. So yeah, and in terms of the sun, I mean, the Egyptians had a lot of it right, but there's a very important thing that they had wrong, and that is they saw the sun as a god. And we know, no. And this, by the way, I have read some theologians about Genesis, and that's the point of Genesis. God created everything. There are no other gods. God created the sun. It's not a god. It's a creation. It's part of creation. And I think that's that's the beauty of our faith, is that it's very coherent. It really holds together very, very beautifully. I mean, I've had various beliefs over my lifespan, as will probably come out later. At one point, I was very into what was called New Age at the time. I looked into some Eastern Eastern religions. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just wandering around in my head. And yeah, so there was a lot of things made a lot of sense, but then ultimately I was still left with that question. Something's missing. What is it? What is missing here? And the only time I answered that question was when I came to believe in Jesus.
And so you mentioned a little bit about where you came from, and I read a little bit that you had some interface very early on with. I think you grew up in a communist or communist leaning, or maybe communist membership household. Can you kind of talk us through that and what your understanding is of that sort of background? Because I think it's not only a political system, but it's also an economic and even a religious system in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of communism as, almost, I would say, semi-religious. And okay, so the story is that my parents and my grandparents, this goes back 3 generations, were very committed communists and atheists, which go together. I mean, by go together, I mean communists tend to be atheists. It's not the other way around. Not all atheists are communists. I would never say that. But atheism is part of the communist ideology. And why do I say it was a little bit like a religion? Well, it had saints, it had dogma, it had rituals, it had belief systems that you could not. I mean, it was not a great religion. Let's put it that way. It was really a very unpleasant religion, because you could not contradict anything that came down from the top. Okay, so my parents had actually been members of the American Communist Party in the 30s, and I think also in the 40s to some extent. And I grew up right after the war. I was born. I'm a boomer, and I grew up in that influence. I wasn't told directly that I should be a communist, because this was during the McCarthy era in the 50s. And my parents would have gotten into big trouble if I had started telling, my friends and my teachers that communism is right. Comrade Stalin is a hero. All the various things I learned. But I did learn a lot of stuff. Not all of it was bad. The Communist Party and other very left-wing people were very much in favor of civil rights and, other progressive things that were probably good. Which, by the way, just as a little aside here, that turned out to be very strange, because when I actually got a little older and I joined the civil rights movement myself, I discovered that all the leaders were Christian. And I had been told that Christianity was not only false, but evil. I mean, it was a terrible thing. Christianity was, I had been taught, was the worst thing you could imagine in the world. It caused all kinds of evil and horrible things to people, and on and on. And then, so how is it that all these wonderful civil rights leaders were Christians? It didn't make any sense to me. And that's a whole nother story. But that's how I started. And of course, part of that was an atheism, which was, I would say, I used to say it was as militant as the new atheism, but it was actually much more than that. Because we never talked about religion, except that it was a joke and a stupidity. And I just assumed that it was impossible for there to be a God. My father was a chemist and a strong materialist, as most atheists are. And, nothing about religion could be true, because it was all supernatural, which is wrong. So that's where I was.
Okay. I dropped out for a second there, so I think it's probably appropriate to ask a question then. So we have this communistic background there, and you begin to see echoes of this in America. And I don't want to get into a conversation about politics. I'm sure you don't either. But you start to see these sorts of things trickle into the 1960s, coming out of specifically certain schools in California, certain schools other places, very college arrival in nature. And then even before that, I mean, even before your parents were involved in that, you see what in the 1970s, 1980s, this Bolshevik revolution. You have Lenin that's proclaiming socialism as sort of that Marx's first step into full-fledged communism, just trying to lead the really all of Europe down that path, and one step at a time. And it's only a two-step path, so you can get there pretty quickly. And so you start to have these things happen in the background, which I imagine your grandparents and your parents probably experienced a lot. And then you being the third generation, you saw this start beginning to happen probably when you were very young. And then starting in college, you probably start to see this sporadically all over the place. And you have this, I guess, sort of a new political class that's arisen in Western countries that are more focused on that socialist revolution, that you pay people based off of how long they work, but then you should really sort of spread it out. It's not a meritocracy. It's more of a I guess some of the people in the 1960s put it this way, said that the new queen is the welfare queen. We give regardless of merit. And that's the new sort of twist that begins to happen in the 1960s. And all of a sudden you fast forward 50 years and we have serious debt issues in most Western countries that are as an outflow of that. And we have young men that are unwilling to have full-time jobs, and they have no hustle. They have no, no skin in the game, because they're a product of 50 years of Western culture there. Now we have a lot of really bright young men who work hard, and we definitely want to support those guys and encourage people to move toward that direction. But you still have sort of the throes. You still sort of have the shadows of what happened in the 1960s. Now, sort of the second generation removed from there. And so all that to ask, Si, you've seen this. You've been in the throes of what the hopes of that sort of philosophy hope to be. What are your biggest concerns in the Western world overall? I mean, and feel free to answer in any way, shape, or form that you see, whether it be policy or political, or however you feel most comfortable.
Okay. I don't usually talk about this. I try to limit my discussion to science, which I know I'm not a philosopher. I'm certainly not a political scientist. But I think I might break that vow a little bit, since you asked the question. And I have to say, this has never been written down anywhere. So this is the first time I'm ever going to be talking about this. It might be the last.
Thank you.
To do with something about, I learned a lot about Marxism as a child. I'm not a scholar, but I grew up in Marxism and I experienced it. I also was in the student movements of the 60s, as you mentioned, and I saw changes occur. And I think what it all comes down to is a moral system. So if we go back to the time of Jesus and we look at, and I'm going to be mentioning a book called Dominion by Tom Holland. He's a British historian, not a theist, not a Christian, or at least not yet. And he writes about the revolutionary ideas that Christianity brought to the world. He talks about the fact that before Christianity, the whole idea of equal rights or justice, or, people should be good to each other regardless of their status, was just unheard of. It was revolutionary. What predominated in the ancient Roman world, and probably in most cultures as well, was the people who were powerful and rich, went together, were powerful and rich, and they could do whatever they wanted. The people who were weak, poor, slaves, whatever, had no rights. They could, if they were lucky, they would exist. If somebody rich wanted to kill somebody poor, he just did it. There was no problem. and that was the general idea, was that, you know, if you're powerful, you're good. You're good. You know, you do whatever you want. If you're not, you're up the creek. Christianity changed that. At least it was supposed to. Now, it didn't always work great. But what Jesus said over and over again was, you know, the last shall be first, the first shall be last. He kept trying to tell people, and then of course Paul in the letters as well, your status doesn't matter. What matters is whether you repent. What matters is whether you have faith. If you're rich, I'm not going to cure you any faster than if you're poor. If you have faith, you know, your faith has made you well. How many times did Jesus say this in the Gospels, right? And so status didn't matter. It was a whole nother way of thinking about things. We still haven't lived it correctly, but that's the goal. And, you know, and that's something that really is the changes that we need to do to bring the kingdom of God. But there's another kind of morality, which is very much based on the original Roman one, and that's Marxist morality. And what Marx did was just take the existing structure of capitalism, where the wealthy and the rich and the powerful were right and the others were wrong, and he turned it upside down. And he said, there are classes, and everybody agreed that there were classes. The upper class was good, the lower class was bad. And what Marx said was, no, the lower class is good because they're being oppressed and they need justice. And the wealthy, the upper class, is bad because they are the oppressors. This was an incredibly, I believe, essential part of Marxism. It wasn't just the economics, it was the social position of the classes. What Marx did was he kept the classes together. So in other words, you could be a very rich, powerful man and be a wonderful person. You could be giving to charity. You could be helping your neighbor. You could be doing all kinds of great things. Didn't matter. You are identified as a member of the wealthy class. Okay. And you could be a worker, a poor person who is, you know, an evil thief or a murderer. And again, what counts is what class are you a member of? So Marx, this has always been true. Both, the only thing Marx changed was who's good and who's bad. But the idea of classes of people identifying in a class remained. The only exception to that is Jesus. Jesus didn't care what class you were in. He cared. He came for the sinners. He came for those who were, you know, he was the physician who came to heal the sick, to heal the sinful. He didn't care if you were rich or poor. He didn't care if you were a religious expert or an ignorant peasant. If you had faith, it didn't matter what your class was. Now, where are we today? I believe there's something that I sometimes call neo-Marxism, which is the idea, again, that what really counts is what class you're in. And there are two classes. There's oppressed and oppressors. And then somehow or other, these people get defined what you are. If you're white, you're an oppressor. If you're black, you're oppressed. If you're straight, you're an oppressor. If you're gay or trans, you're oppressed. If you're an Israeli, you're an oppressor. If you're a Palestinian, you're oppressed. on and on and on. And I was in this movement when it was happening. And I remember very clearly going to meetings and people would come and say, for example, we're Chinese, we're oppressed. And there would be a big debate. Are they oppressed or not? And if they got into, if you could identify as Asian and then you were oppressed, you were okay. You see what I'm saying? And that's what we have now. Everybody talks to everybody else based on their class membership. It's sometimes called identity politics. And I hate that. I really hate that.
Yes.
And I think that's our problem. We need to go back to Christian views on who people are. They are not identified by our labels. Now, as I say, I've never said this before. I've never spoken it out loud. I've thought about it. I've written it down, but I've never published it. And so that's, you asked the question, I gave the answer.
Well, I appreciate that, Sayed. That was very helpful, and I love your passion there. That may be the most passionate I've ever seen you. A number of interviews that I've seen you on, so I really appreciate you being open and honest there. But it's an important thing, right? I mean, I see the same thing. I call them victors and victims. You have to align with one of the two in order to get through. And
that's right. That's right.
It's based off the satanic principle of comparison. That I'm going to compare what you have versus what I want. That's greed. That's covetousness. Or I'm going to compare myself against you. That's pride. And that's what the Jewish God came to break down. Christ came to break down. I mean, it's this comparative nature that has this satanic overtone and undertone as well, that drives us all into this sort of doom loop of outdoing one another. And right now, it's just the victims. It's the victims, and the irony of the situation is the irony of the situation is you could burn all your books, all your papers, everything, and you would still have your competency, and you'd be able to recreate all of that probably even better than you did the first time. And the little bit of competency that I have, you could take away everything that I have. I can rebuild it. Because you saw the competency. It's the competency. It's not the money. It's not the intellect. It's none of that. It's the experience and the network and the relationships that you have that give a man or a woman wealth. And that's what the acceding into being, consider yourself a victor that then helps the true victims, not the people that cry out in the false vagueness of victimhood because they were told to be victims that need to be helped.
Yeah, I mean, let me just add a little bit to that. I've been a member of a church for only about 12 years. I was baptized 12 years ago, not very long. And I've been to several churches. My church often has services with other churches. And, there's one place in this world that you see people belonging to all these artificial classes coming together as one, and that's in church. I mean, that's, I can get emotional about this, but there's no question in my mind that if we could all follow Jesus, I mean, all people could follow Jesus, more than half, 90% of the reasons that people fight each other and hate each other would go away.
Yes.
And this is, and I'll tell you something I think is very interesting. I'm just speaking off the cuff now. A lot of folks have been noticing that a lot of atheists are beginning to say, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in Jesus, but I'll tell you something, Christianity is a good thing. Richard Dawkins has said that. He says, I'm a cultural Christian because I think Christianity adds something to the world. He doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe in Jesus. But what is he saying? he sees with his eyes, he sees that Christians are a family who based on love. They're not, this is, of course, there are exceptions, but that's what he sees. That's what many, many people are seeing, even if they can't bring themselves to believe all the way. And that's where we need to go. We need to put away these ridiculous distinctions of, well, who's more oppressed than somebody else? So-and-so is a black comic, but he can't make fun of transgenders because transgenders are more victims than a black man is. Come on. I mean, how are we living with this nonsense, this insanity? And
yes,
the answer to all of it, to me, I mean, other than logic and reason, which doesn't seem to make any effect, the real answer is Jesus Christ. Listen to what he told us. He told us how to live. Love your neighbor and love God. Well, loving your neighbor, that's a revolutionary idea, but boy, does it work.
that's a great point, right? And he said, love your neighbor as yourself. And in with that, there's a mathematical formula implied. It's that I can't spend more on myself than I spend on my neighbor. He brings in this idea of the 50% or perhaps the 51% offering or the tithe to your neighbor as the standard of love. That's all implied there. And from there, you have this heightening of all the prior laws that happens, and then it cascades down to every single part of your life, because it's not just your money you're giving away, it's your very self, it's your very love, it's your very will. And if we could have one man on earth that really believed every word of Christ, the whole earth would be different. And I think that's probably a lot of our baggage, is we're looking around at the material world, we're looking at we're thinking about ourselves too much. We're looking at this comparison too much, and we're not setting our eyes on the standard of in the person of truth, and we rob the world of grandeur, I think.
Yeah. Amen. And there's so much grandeur to be had.
There is, and I want to get you back to science where you're comfortable for. And again, I apologize for I did not put the victim-victor stuff on the proposed agenda, but thanks for playing along. I mentioned it earlier, this paradoxality of the electron, which is this really interesting subatomic particle that just happens to be a wave, like light or sound. It just really sort of this awkward thing that's nebulous floating out there, where we us and all of our intellectual grandeur as scientists or wannabe scientists, we think we understand the natural world, and we get ourselves up on the pedestal, and then we look at like one of the tiniest possible things unimaginable, and it just blows up our minds. Walk us through kind of some of the interesting things about the electron, and maybe anything else that you see that's sort of paradoxical, and things that maybe should alert us to the lurking behind the scenes of this grandeur.
Well, yeah. So this gets into the whole area of quantum mechanics, which again, I have to say, I'm not a physicist, and I have been corrected by my physicist friends many times, so it could happen again. But I have a chapter in this book where I talk about the dual nature of electrons, and the harmony with faith is the dual nature of Christ. I mean, we know that Jesus was fully divine and fully human, and that sounds like a contradiction. Can't be true, right? How can you have something that's, fully metal and fully wood? I mean, it can't be both at the same time. Well, it turns out it can. And the example is the electron. Electrons were conceived to be particles because, well, that's how people were thinking at the time, that they're little particles, and they do behave like particles in many experiments. They go through slits and they act like particles, but they also behave like waves. And if anyone is interested in more on this, just Google double slit experiment. There's some great videos that show you all about how these experiments work and what they mean in terms of the electron. And so it turns out that the electron has properties that make it certainly seem to be completely a particle, but other properties that make it seem to be completely a wave. So the idea that Jesus Christ cannot be fully human and fully divine and it defies logic, well, yeah, it might defy logic, but it doesn't defy science, because science is not logic. And quantum mechanics, that's not the only thing in quantum mechanics that defies logic. If you want to know where an electron is, you can only tell where it is. In other words, sometimes we think of the electron as a cloud of charge, not in a specific point. But then all of a sudden the electron ends up in a specific point. And the way we find that is by observing it. Now, here's the thing, and this is very tricky. We can, if we observe the electron or other particles, we can tell things about them, but not because we don't know where they are and then we see them and we say, oh, that's where they are. No, the electron actually goes to the place where it's supposed to be once we are looking at it. This is like, you can't find your kid, your 3-year-old. He's running around the house. You don't know where he is. And you're calling his name and he hears you and he comes over and he says, here I am. Okay, that's not what the electrons do. You could be looking for the electron and then you see your experiment finds out where it is, but it got there because you were looking at it. This is called the observer effect. It's incredibly strange. And even more so, if you want to know where the electron is and you already know exactly its momentum, in other words, how fast it's going, you can never know where it is. If you know exactly where it is, you can never know how fast it's going. The more you know about one thing, the less you know about the other. This is called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And what it tells us is it's never possible to know exactly where the electron is and how fast it's going at the same time. And that is a fact of physics that is undisputable, because what we're doing right now is based on that. That uncertainty principle is critical to computer technology and cell phones and everything else. And what does that tell us about the nature of reality? Not only is it strange, it's incomprehensible in the way we think. And with that, again, that when I began learning about quantum mechanics, and there are many other things I won't get into, quantum tunneling and superposition and all kinds of stuff, which just don't make any human sense. They're not reasonable or rational, but they're true. They're absolutely true. They can be proven true by experiments that are, undeniably accurate. And that was one of the first things that led me to this question: what are we missing? How can this all be real? What does this tell us about our world? It's not easily explainable by science. It's not just applying math and logic and experiments and getting results and then everything makes sense. No, there's something missing. And that's what started me on the path to try to find out what was missing.
That is one of the most shocking things I've ever heard. It truly is. And so let me ask you about sort of the concept of the observer, because it seems in this instance it's a controlling factor in the electron's, I guess, location. But it seems that another side, yeah. And so it seems that there's also some authority of the observer in other elements, because it seems to me there's always an observer that sets up the thesis or sets up the purpose of the experiment. There's also always an observer that sort of oversees it and writes up what happens afterwards. And so what is the observer in your opinion as we conduct scientific experiments? And then also, is it ever possible to remove the observer so that there's no interference caused by observer?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, that I don't know if you've ever heard of Schrodinger's cat. It's when this observer effect was first brought up, physicists said, well, that's ridiculous. That would be like having a cat in a box, and you don't know if the cat is dead or alive. And the cat is pressing on a button, which is having some effect on a radioactive decay. Anyway, it has some effect in the natural world. And you don't know whether the cat is dead or alive until you open the box. And when you open the box, then you know whether the cat is dead or alive. Now, that's not the observer effect. That was an attempt to try to understand the observer effect. The observer effect would be more, the cat is either dead or alive, but when you look at it, it becomes dead or alive. It didn't die earlier, and now you open it up and you say, okay, now I see it's dead. No, by looking at it, you cause it to either die or remain alive. And that's crazy, right? That's just crazy. And and then you start asking yourself, well, who is the observer? I mean, humans can't be the observer everywhere. They weren't humans for a while. And, you know, there's no answer to that. Now, there are answers that physicists have given, and I don't understand them. It's just way outside of my realm. I shouldn't even be talking about it, but it's nobody says this is easy. This is hard stuff. And, you know, superposition is also true, but equally crazy. I mean, what that says is that two particles which are entangled with each other in some way can be separated millions of light years apart, and if you change one, the other changes instantaneously, even though it's not possible for any signal to go from one to the other. So, you know, physicists have two ways of dealing with this. One is to say, we don't understand it, so what? It's true. And the phrase that Sean Carroll, the physicist, uses is shut up and calculate. In other words, don't worry about it. Just, we know it's true. Use it, calculate the reality. You're all done. Don't worry your head about it. The other thing some physicists try to do is try to understand, you know, where it comes from. And they come up with all kinds of ideas, multiverses. Oh, my goodness. You know, some theories are that every time anything happens, whole new universes develop. I mean, it gets into the science fiction realm very quickly, but it's all true.
Yes.
So
yes.
What does it mean? It means God's creation. We got a long way to go before we can really understand it. And that doesn't include biology, which is much harder.
Well, let's dive into maybe a subject closer to home, the idea of DNA, this grand masterpiece of a book that is us in some sense.
Right.
That came apart. We all know came apart randomly. There's no such thing as any sort of order. There's no such sort of thing that as a mind, just a random book that appeared times 6 billion people. Nothing to see here. No, look away, folks. But tell us a little bit about your work with DNA. I've heard you speak out a couple times at length. Your work with DNA, what it means, not only biologically but also sort of, I guess, metaphysically, maybe. Like why are we composed of communication?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to say about DNA, obviously. It's a code. It's coded information. There's no question about that. Another little aside, there's been a recent atheist meme, which is insane, which is the DNA and the genetic code are not real codes. They're just chemicals. I don't know where this came from. No biologist believes that. Richard Dawkins himself, who you could not call as a theist, has said, of course, DNA is a code. There's no question about that. And all biologists agree. So I don't know where this came from, but I wish atheists would stop saying it, because it's really, it's so wrong and it's so silly that it's pointless, but they don't listen to me. Anyway, DNA is the first example of coded information in the universe. There isn't any other. There is information, and we have to be careful because there are several definitions of information. And I'm not talking about the physics definition, which has to do with Shannon information. It's very technical. I'm not going to get into it. I'm talking about the kind of information we use when we say, "Oh, that's good information." You know, if I tell you I'm going to come on at 1 o'clock and I'll use your link. You know, I'm giving you information. That's the kind of information we're talking about. You understand that? And DNA does that. We don't know how it originated. We don't know how it began. There are a few theories. None of them are terribly good. There's so many reasons why that's a very, very, very difficult problem. But we do know that there is one genetic code which holds for all of life. There are a few very, very minor exceptions where one set of DNA bases codes for something slightly different, but that's irrelevant. The basic code is the same for every living cell in bacteria and has been since pretty much almost the origin of life. And we don't know how it came about. And it's a language. So it has words. Each word consists of 3 letters, the letters of the various bases in DNA. And every word stands for an amino acid. So if you have a sequence of these bases, of these letters, there are 4 of them, A, T, C, G. If you have a sequence of 3, any sequence of 3 stands for 1 amino acid. And there are 20 amino acids. So you can make any protein based on the sequence of the DNA bases in a stretch of DNA. And that's incredible. It's remarkable. It could not have evolved. And the reason that's true is a little technical. I recently published a paper on it. It could not have evolved because the ability to have a DNA which codes for accurate protein replication is required for evolution. So you can't have this system evolve because you got to have evolution first. And you can't get evolution unless this is already there. So we don't know. We have no clue how that could have happened. Did it just spontaneously form a long chain of? No. I mean, that's chemically impossible. It's something missing. Now, do I believe that God created DNA? Yes, I do, but that's not a scientific view. Scientifically, I would say it's much like the rest of the natural world. There's going to be an answer, a scientific law or a scientific principle that we have no idea what it is now yet. But when we find it, if we find it, and I'm assuming we will, that law, like all the other laws of science, will point to the God as the creator. That's what I believe. Science is a signpost to the divine creation. And that's why I continually say it's not science versus God. It's God and science together in harmony.
So I think that I read you were a flautist and a guitarist
Yeah.
in your high school years. And so I was a trumpet performance major. And so I'm right there. I'm right there
Wow.
with you. We, work really hard. I graduated college and decided to go into business instead of playing. And it looks like you did the same thing. You also escaped from the lure of the sexiness of the musical arts. And
Well, I
we
had an advantage, Rick. I had an
okay.
advantage. I had very little talent in music, so it wasn't even an issue for me. I barely got into the High School of Music and Art in New York, and I couldn't believe when I got in, but I was in the lowest level. So it wasn't even an option.
Okay. It seems that like those of us that kind of grew up around music, that we have a little bit of the flair for art and history and excuse me and sort of the earth, like the creation, like we have some sort of special affinity for that, almost that like maybe art and creation are maybe sisters, or there's some sort of corollary relationship among the two. I just get that sense there. I mean, is that something that you've ever thought about or picked up on? I mean, do you kind of get that sense that when you look up at nature, you look at the mountains, there's some musicality about it?
I have a saying that I use often, and it dawned on me, I don't remember when, some point after I came to Christ. Music is prayer. It's just prayer. I mean, when I listen to music, when I play music, I'm praying, and the person playing it is praying. And why do I say that? Because I think God loves music. I really do. And I think the gift of music that we humans have is one of the key parts of being made in the image of God. I mean, that's, birds sing beautifully, but they're not really doing music, are they? And maybe whales. I mean, whales make incredible sounds, which may be musical, but I just think that when I listen to, not long ago, I heard an African choir came and performed live, and as I'm sure you know, African music is very different from what you and I studied, right? I mean, it's a whole nother field. And I was sitting there listening to this with my eyes and mouth wide open. It was incredibly beautiful and absolutely mysterious, because the keys are not, our keys. They're not the keys we know. The whole harmonic, and the whole harmonic is different. And I was just struck by the fact that, God has endowed us with this incredible talent. And how does it fit in with beauty and art and creativity? Well, music is a creation. We are creative. I mean, if there's one word that describes humans, and by the way, this also does not come from evolution, because there's no selective advantage in making beautiful art, and singing beautiful songs. I mean, that's extra, and we all have it. I mean, I don't think there's a human culture that doesn't sing. That's just, I never heard of anything like that. So, that's what we are. We create everything. We create the internet. We create, math. We create science, scientific laws. We create religions. We don't create nature, but we study it. And we don't create. That's all right. I'm done.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You were still dealing with the lag here, guys. So I apologize for interrupting. Cy.
No, it's fine. I
That is that was beautiful. Thank you. The So it seems that we have two things. We have natural science sort of written in the language of mathematics, and then we also have music written in the language of mathematics. That's essentially what it is. I mean, I guess there's waves connected to it there, right? You've got the two things that are happening in tandem. Right. We've discussed the idea of fractals, and of course, the preeminent artist that used fractals, I think it was Jackson Pollock, which I don't think he was a Christian or a man of belief in any way, shape, or form. He used almost entirely fractals in his artwork. If you watch some of the old videos of him painting, and so we begin to see these common themes emerge out of these various domains. That sort of a wobbling, meandering thing that sort of take us up into the divine or the Platonic or whatever you want to say is sort of out there beyond the natural. There's this, as Lewis would say, there's this striking down into the supernatural, into the natural world that creates a cataclysmic change there. And so, I'd like to kind of get your take on like, you have a lot of knowledge in a lot of different areas. Do you use a sort of I call it a meta narrative? I think some people would use something like the yin and yang. Some people would just say that my meta narrative is the Christian story. Some people's meta narrative may be the art of stories, or it may be mathematics somehow. They sort of plug in all their different the domains that they hear about art and music and science. They plug it all sort of in the centralized framework to help interpret it all. Is there one meta narrative that you use as you think about all these different various aspects of reality?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'll have to make it up as I go along, because I haven't thought about that. I think the closest would be some version of science within a Christian framework. The science of creation is a good way to put it, because I do believe very strongly, and that'll never leave me, that science is a wonderful tool to understand the natural world, the world that God created. And that's why I do not think that it makes sense to say, well, we don't understand this, so God must have done it. God did do it. To me, there's no doubt about it, whatever it is, whether it's the origin of life, the origin of the universe, human nature, that is a creation of God. But we can possibly, I would hope, go further than that, do more. We can try to understand how did God do it? What was the principles that he created, for example, to allow us to be musical? What to allow us to have souls? I mean, we know that we have souls. God granted us souls. How did that happen? Now, we may not be able to do that scientifically. Origin of life is something I'm very, very interested in. And, there's a big debate among Christians who are studying this, whether or not it should even be studied, because obviously it doesn't look like there's going to be a scientific answer. But I think there will be. But that answer is not going to be within the bounds of what we now know of as science. It's going to have to include new stuff. Now, that's perfectly legitimate, because that's what happened in physics. The problem of light could not be solved using the mathematics and the knowledge that physicists had in 1905. Einstein had to use a whole new kind of mathematics to get there, to get relativity. We're going to have to do that in biology if we want to understand how biology came from chemistry. We're going to need something brand new, and it's going to point to God. Just as I believe quantum mechanics points to God and relativity points to something beyond what we think of as rational, natural physics. And this brings up what you said about natural and supernatural. You know, think about this. Imagine an experiment. I go back in time and I go into a room. Well, let me put it somewhere else. I go back in time and I bring somebody from 1500 back with me to the present. And I bring them into my house and I put my hand on the wall and the house becomes light. And he says, magic. It's supernatural. And I say, no. It's scientific. It's electricity. He says, what? It's electricity. There's a switch here. I hit the switch. The switch turns on the electricity. What's electricity? Oh, electricity is electrons going through a wire. No, I can't explain electricity to him. But it's natural. It's not a supernatural miracle. It's natural to us. It's supernatural to him. And if you look at human history, this has been going on constantly. If my grandfather, who was alive in the 20th century, saw what we're doing now, he'd say, what? How are you talking to this person? Is there a person? Where is he? How's that possible? He knows about radios. He knew about television. But this is not television. You're talking to me, I'm talking to you. What is this? It's never going to end. We are continually converting the supernatural into the natural. And, when people say, oh, the Bible is wrong scientifically, I always say, oh, yeah, which science are you talking about? The science of 3000 BC, the science of today, or the science of 2025, or the science of 2500? I guarantee you what we think is true today scientifically is not going to be true scientifically in 500 years. They're going to look back at us and say, what a bunch of idiots. So, it's ridiculous to start talking about, oh, that's not scientifically valid. That's supernatural. That's not natural. I only believe in the natural. No, you don't. You believe in what we now, what you think we now know, but we didn't used to know, and we'll know it was wrong later.
So we will be called mere savages by people of 400 years from now. Yes. I think I concur with that. I think I can call us savages right now for the most part. So I want to segue into writing. It seems that writing has been one of your tools of choice throughout your career, and so I want to just learn a little bit from you through that escapade. And I'm writing my first book right now. I hope to release it in Q3, and it started off as an essay, and then the essay was 15,000 words, so I broke it up in 2 essays, and so now I think the editor and I are trying to cut it down. I'm at 919 pages, and it's 21
Whoa.
essays. It's a big boy. And I've already cut 100,000 words, Si. I've already cut 100,000 words, so it's a beast. But sooner or later you got to get it out in the world and see what happens. And so you mentioned quantum entanglement a second ago, and I've got a similar theory that I started working on. And actually, this was the very first of the essays. This idea, as quantum entanglement is to the spatial area, it's sort of an anticipator. It's a reflector of what's happening multiple places in space. I believe that much of creation can be shown through a similar function of anticipatory revelation in time, so that there is the future material that is to exist would have anticipated a spoken word, and in some way, shape, or form, that would have materialized in the future. That I guess another way of saying it is this is the way that Wayne Grudem says it in his systematic theology textbook, that the command always carries with it the power to obey. And even if the material is not in existence yet, it must still obey. And so there's this great anticipation that comes out of the void. And I spent a good deal of the book speaking about that theory, but it reminds me a little bit about quantum entanglement, but over time rather over space. And so I think we're probably, so I think we're probably writing sort of in similar areas, similar theories, sort of circling the same idea from different facets. Mine looks more like a rock, yours looks more like a polished diamond, but we're still trying to do the same thing. But give us an overview of sort of your writing, how you write a book compared to writing a paper. Even like, if you're going to have a writing day, what does a writing day look like? Where are you? What are you drinking? What are you eating? When are you waking up? That sort of thing. As much detail as you can provide. I would love to learn from you and just hear a little bit about how you accomplish everything that you do up from a writing standpoint.
Well, you might be disappointed, Rick. I did a lot of writing in my scientific career, and that was scientific papers, which is a whole different thing. It has nothing to do with the kind of writing I've been doing later. It's a different style. It's just totally not connected. However, I've always loved to write. I've even written some fiction, which is not worth discussing, but it's fun to do. And I recently wrote an essay, which I think I published on my blog, called Should You Be a Writer? And what I wrote was, no, you should not. And the reason I say that is it's very, very hard. It doesn't make you any money. Lots of other things. It's not healthy. You don't go outside. You're stuck indoors. But at the end of it, I say, if you're upset at what you've read here and you think I'm full of it and you want to tell me to just go to hell, you're going to be a writer because you just feel you have to write. And it doesn't matter what I say, you're going to do it anyway. Well, then you are a writer. So go ahead and write. And that's basically, I think it's true for many, many people I know. And I know quite a few writers now. They can't not write. And that happened to me. At various times in my life, I just felt something that I had to put down. Sometimes I would actually feel it came from the Holy Spirit, and I would feel it. And I would, sometimes when I write, I'm crying as I'm writing. I mean, I feel. I know many writers do it this way. I cannot. They say, I'm going to write, 5,000 words this morning, and they sit down and they write 5,000 words. I don't do that. I can't do it. I have to know what I'm going to say. And so what I end up doing is I write sometimes very disconnected things on, maybe they're all related to one thing like science and faith. Maybe they're related to something in specific. And with my first book, The Works of His Hands, I had gathered a lot of those things. Some of them were even in blog posts or just comments online or whatever. And I kind of put them together. And that's not the best way to do it. I think the best way to do it is to just sit down and write the book. Maybe that's what you did, but I don't have that kind of ability. So I put it all together, and then of course it's a hodgepodge mess. So then I spend effort in fixing it and editing it and making it a little better and smoothing it and adding what's missing and blah, blah, blah. So that's my, I don't recommend this for anybody. Everybody has their own system or lack of system that works. One thing I try to do, and I think this has been the case in both of these first two books, is I try not to inhibit my passion. I think people like to read things that are somewhat passionate. I think they like to see feelings, expressed in writing. I'm not a poet, but in the first book, as you know, I had fables. I made up stories, so which were partially funny and partially, telling a story. In the second book, I don't write fables, but there are several chapters that are just stories of my life. One chapter, I believe it's called "The Voice of God," is about me being out on a small boat off the coast of Maine and encountering two dolphins who brought me back to shore. And, the religious passion that I felt at that time and during that experience is what I tried to put in to the writing. Doesn't always work, but when it does, it feels good. So I don't know how much more I can say about it. I just completed a third book, which probably is going to need a lot of improvement, but that's true for all writing. I mean, I don't know if anyone has ever published a book that was not edited. It's that's critical. So
yeah,
I don't know if that was helpful, but that's about all I can say. Yeah.
Very helpful. Very helpful. So if you're in the middle of a book project, are you getting up and writing all day long on just that book? Or can you write in little spurts of 20, 30 minutes, or do you need hours, like blocks of time? How do you think best for producing?
That's a good question. Well, I think it's changed. I've gotten older, so I don't have quite as much energy as I used to have. I don't think I can do anything for more than an hour at a time. There have been days when I've really written intensely for half the day, maybe. And the other thing is that I am very much a morning person. I'll get up, I always have been. I get up at 5 a.m. usually. That's a great time for me to write, edit, write, whatever, revise. By 2 o'clock, I'm done. I can do some revisions, but I generally play computer games after 2 o'clock. I mean, that's all I'm good for.
Sorry, the delay had me interfering as well. Again, so I apologize. So you're done by 2 o'clock, and so are you reading or anything after 2 o'clock, or are you just kind of mentally you're checked out for the rest of the day?
No, I can read. And I have a lot of reading to do. These days I'm reading a lot of other people's work. I've been asked to write a foreword for a book, so I have to read it. There are things like that come along. A lot of stuff online. I'm pretty active online on Twitter and Facebook, and have a blog. So yeah, there's a lot of other things to do besides book writing. And so I'm very fortunate. At 76, I'm busy. I'm not hanging out, trying to think what to do next.
Yeah,
so I've been lucky.
Yeah. Work is worship, and you're blessed to be able to do it.
That's right. Thank God.
So I think I am very, very similar to you. So I'm up most days at 3:30, and I'm in the office reading by 4:15. I have a 20-minute drive to my office. That's where I am right now, and I will read for a couple of hours. And then if it's a good day, I don't have any meetings, I can write all day. I'll go get some breakfast, and I'll start writing down ideas for writing. And then I can generally, maybe a year ago, it was only maybe 4 hours a day of writing, and I was just mentally wasted. Now I can do 8 hours up to 12 hours a day of writing. But I can't. But in the afternoons, it's basically editing, like around 3, same sort of thing. 3 o'clock. I'm pressing 11 hours almost. I'm good for editing. I'm not good for creativity. I can't read after about noon. Once I start on a device for the day, I can't read a book, and I prefer to read physical books rather than digital devices.
Right.
But I think a lot of similarity there. But yeah, I was a 5 a.m. for a long time, and I started creeping it back 15 minutes, and 3:30 got to be the sweet spot for me, just for concentration. I can hit flow fairly quickly at 4:15, where I can't at 6:15. It's just an amazing thing. So I can get really 2 to 2.5 hours of good solid work in there before the good breakfast restaurants open up, and I can start ingesting carbs and start my day there. But yeah, very, very similar. What do you think about the blog and the newsletter work? I just started a newsletter last month myself. What are you finding out through the blogs and the sort of the ancillary writing opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I started a newsletter about 3 years ago, maybe 2. I can't remember now. No, it was about 3 years ago. Yeah, and but it was irregular. I did it every month for a while. Then I took a long break, and then I put it out again. And this was basically related originally to the marketing idea for the books. Is that, and I think this is true. I've gone to writers' conferences and paid attention to some experts in the writing field who said that having a platform online is not as good as it used to be. So you don't sell a lot of books on Twitter or Facebook, and I found that to be true. I have a nice Twitter following, but they don't buy my books. So if you're watching on Twitter now, go buy the book.
Go buy books. Yeah, prove Cy wrong. Go buy all of his books. Yes.
Prove me wrong. Right. So I started, I started a newsletter, and I have, a fair number of subscribers, and the blog has a number. I don't even know how many subscribers. There's some there too. But what I use the blog for is trying out ideas. So I'll write a blog post. For example, some of the chapters in the second book, Science and Faith and Harmony, came from blog posts, which got some good attention, and I felt good about them. I wrote them. They're short. Yeah, a blog post is 1,000 words roughly. So if you write a blog post and it feels good and you get some good comments, you can turn that into something else. And I do some other writing as well online. I'll occasionally a long post on Facebook or several tweets or whatever. But those I don't plan. I wait till, again, the spirit moves me. And if I think of something that I can put into, 260 characters, I'll put it up on Twitter, on X. And if I have something a little longer, I might put it onto Facebook. And I like to see what the feedback is, I have a website which I keep up to date, and that involves some degree of work as well, that covers everything about me. I mean, everything is there somewhere. In case people want to know, and they can contact me there. It's just cygarte.com. It's very easy. And there's a contact form and a newsletter sign up form. So, and if I have offers, like I'll give away a book or I'll give away, I have an ongoing giving away signed book plates. So all of that's on the website. So, And I've written some articles for magazines. Christianity Today published a testimony of mine a few years ago, which was very well received. I talked about how I came to faith, and I published in Premier Christianity several articles, which is the British version, and a few other magazines. So I guess I have to consider myself a writer. But I'm still publishing scientific papers. My latest scientific paper came out a couple of months ago in a mainstream journal, Biosystems, and this is all theoretical biology. Obviously, I don't have a lab. I'm long retired, but I like to keep thinking about issues in theoretical biology, which to me are associated with my beliefs, but of course that doesn't go into the paper. Excuse me.
So let me try out a theory on you while you're taking a second. Let me try out a theory on you that I've been thinking about. So I have this theory that, again, we talked about time being broken earlier. I have this theory that when you look at the relationships between mathematics and the natural sciences, that math is not only the confirmer that the scientific experiment was done correctly, but also math comes before it and predicts what the natural science should do. In many cases, I know this is inductive, deductive, various ways of phrasing that. But it seems to me like for instance, you look at Einstein, you look at his imaginative experiments, riding along a light wave, that sort of thing, but it doesn't actually get observed in natural history until all the stars align, the planet's alive, 14 years later, whenever it was. And so you have this imagination giving rise to the mathematics that then predicts what will happen in nature, and then is confirmed later on. It's judged backwards in time by the math again, that confirms whether or not the experiment was right, and also it confirms the imaginative elements were right as well. So it seems to me that math, in a certain sense, prophesies what will happen in natural reality. What say you?
Well, that's interesting. I haven't thought of it that way. What I tend to think of, and I remember I'm a biologist, and we don't do a lot of math usually, although I do. I like math. But most biologists are not heavily into math. But what I think is more the case is that somebody does an experiment thinking about a theory or a hypothesis that they've had, and the experiment gives results that are completely unexpected. And that's almost always true. I mean, you often get experimental results that you were not expecting. And now what do you do with that? Well, you repeat the experiment, you ask other people to do it, they get the same thing. And then if you're a physicist or a chemist, you start to put it into the context of all the physical theory we know, and that's mathematical. And you find it doesn't fit any of those theories because remember, the result was unexpected. So what do you do? Well, if you're Werner Heisenberg, you write a new theory. You say, oh, okay, we could not tell we experimentally could not figure out the position of the electron. So maybe there's a formula that tells us we can't do both. And he writes a very simple formula, by the way. This formula is very simple. It's it just basically says that the momentum times the velocity times a constant equals a constant, and that tells you can't know both. So and the Schrodinger equation, which is another empirical, came from data, doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, because that's the one that says, first of all, it's based on an imaginary number, which is the square root of -1. It's the first term. And also, it's all about probability. It's not telling you where the electron is. It's telling you the electron is in a probability cloud. And then there are other terms in the equation which are difficult to understand unless you're in advanced math. So, but you can still make an equation and then test it. Okay, so then you say, okay, now I have an equation that fits my results, but let's see if it's really true. So I'm going to do more experiments using this equation as the basis, and this is what you're talking about, the prophecy. Okay, the equation is now being tested to see whether it's a true prophecy. Is it going to give the results that the equation predicted? And if it does, you got a new law. And that's what people did. That's what chemists did. The ideal gas law, which is a famous one in chemistry, which tells you that the pressure, the volume, and the temperature. Sorry, I couldn't remember. The pressure, temperature, and volume of the gas are all related in one formula. And it's the pressure times the volume is equal to the number of molecules times the temperature times a constant. Okay, that's a law. It's a mathematical law. And it came about by the combination of several other laws. There was one law that only related pressure to volume, and another one that said volume to temperature. If you raise the temperature, you increase the volume. If you raise the pressure, you raise the volume, etc. And then all those laws were put together, and they came out with one law which rules all of gas behavior. And it was proven by doing experiments, and it never failed.
So prophecy always, if you think the way I'm thinking about it with math and physics, and you just basically just said this, that it's whether or not the predicted event, the latter event in the natural world, if it actually comes true, and it should have been expected. It couldn't be something that would obviously come true. It has to be something that no one imagined that would become true. That thing kind of goes back in time to kind of anoint the predictive device, the mathematics, as kind of a prophetic type of device. Like so prophecies always come in pairs. You got the claim made, and also you have the claim made, and you also have the future event that happens. If it does happen, then it dictates that what happened prior to that was a true prophecy. And you see, it seems to me that plays out in the sort of the scientific realm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I think that's right.
Okay. And as we begin to wrap up our time together, again, I appreciate, Cy, your willingness to share and kind of go off script a little bit. And we're definitely going to link to your website, your books, and your blog as well down below in the comment section as you get around the different platforms. How should us that are sort of in the normal, like the world of business, and we don't really think about science very much. We don't really think about mathematics, right, or the deeper, truer, more tangible things. They're a little bit removed from us because we're like writers. We're indoors all the time on these virtual devices, typing up electrons that are who knows where. What are some of the things that you think right now are important for us to be aware of that are happening in the scientific realm, in the theological realm, the realms that you're kind of surfing across right now? What are the things we need to be paying attention to?
Well, I mean, I hate to say this because it's very rapidly becoming a cliche. One of the big, we're having a conference on science and faith in July, and I'm one of the program chairs. And I would say a large section of that is devoted to AI. And this is a conference of it's called the American Scientific Affiliation. It's a organization of Christians who are scientists. So we get together every year in the summer usually. And this meeting has, I think, 4 or 5 sessions on artificial intelligence and its implications both in scientific work, but even more so in theology. I am not a great fan of AI, I have to admit. Maybe it's because of my age. I'm not impressed by it, although I think it does what it's supposed to do quite well. It's basically a very rapid search engine for Google and other places, and it can do good things. I'm not too worried about it, but there are people who are very worried about AI, both when it comes to, for example, creativity. We've talked a lot about that. I mean, AI can write music, it can write books. I don't like what it writes so far. I think it's obviously what I sometimes call it SI, stupid, and artificial stupidity, AS. I mean, but that's not fair because it does good work. There are times when it's quite useful. It's still in the development phase, and will it be risky? I don't know, and that's one of the reasons we're talking about it so much. We don't really know what it's going to lead to. So that's one thing that I think is worth paying attention to in the future, to some extent. As I said, I don't tend to get as worked up about it as many other people do. But I would come back to, I guess I could only say the culture war is the best way to describe it. We need to take science out of that, and we need to take religion out of it. And it's a shame when people take sides based on either one or both. I don't see any reason why Christians should be at war with each other. I think that's a terrible thing. I'm not saying it's very frequent, but it's been happening a little bit. And I don't think anybody should be at war with science. Science is a great gift to humanity and to ourselves. We gave it to ourselves and inspired by God. I mean, it didn't come from nowhere. And so, arguing about politics, about economics, that's fine. That's people have been doing that since the beginning of time. And that's okay. I mean, I would prefer, as I'm sure everybody would agree, that all these arguments could become a little more civilized, less dramatic. But let's keep. We can disagree about everything, and we do, and we should. And I have good friends who don't agree with me about evolution or creationism, and we don't yell at each other. We just try to convince each other, and that's how we should be. And again, this is part of Christ's message. I mean, I always refer, one of my favorite chapters in the Bible is Acts chapter 15, which describes one of the first big controversies in the new church. The controversy about between James and Paul about do people have to follow the Jewish dietary laws in order to be Christian? And they came up with a compromise, and they went down to Alexandria, I don't remember that, to one of the big cities where Christians were arguing about this, and they told them, look, let's not fight about this. Here's what the council in Jerusalem has come up with. It's a compromise, and let's follow that. And that's a model. To me, Acts chapter 15 should be the model. Argue, discuss, present evidence, come to some sort of compromise agreement, and move on. And I think that's true in many scientific areas and in many areas. And I wish to see, I hope and pray to see that we can begin to do that rather than just drawing into separate camps more and more. And I'm not the only one saying this. Many people have been saying this recently. There's just too much anger, too much hatred, and too much strife, and especially within the church. I wish that would go away.
I love that. I love that. Let's conclude our time together with that. I couldn't imagine a better way to be encouraged as we go on our own ways. I want to thank I think on YouTube, I think we've got 40 new memberships that came up over the last 2 hours. So I want to thank everyone for joining the YouTube channel over there. Thanks guys for turning on Facebook and for Twitter and Rumble. And I think LinkedIn as well. I think we have some business people that are supposed to be working right now, tuning in to Cy. So Cy's extracting value from the Western economy through his encouragement. And so there's a lot of employers that are upset with Cy right now, but he'll get good publicity out of this. So Cy, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for your encouragement and your faith and your willingness to share how all that works, and just sharing with us a drop or two of your wisdom.
It's been great, Rick. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Great. Guys, thanks so much. Thanks so much for tuning in. Tomorrow, I believe we've got a former Benjamin Netanyahu expert and advisor that'll be joining us midday. Check it out on all the streams. Look forward to joining you guys there as well. Links below to Cy's various channels and outlets. Please follow, subscribe, whatever you can to support Cy. We'd really appreciate that. Have a great rest of the day, and get back to work. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.